So let's remind ourselves, notice we're still alive. Kind of like it sounds like a joke, you know? And all that proves is that we have the assumption, there's an assumption deep in our bones that we're permanent, which is something we've made up. One of the many lies in our mind, as Lama Zopa says, it's called grasping at permanent me. This is a grosser mistake, actually, than grasping at inherent me. You know, so it's one of the many lies in this hierarchy in our mind. So we counteract that by simply thinking, wow, I'm still alive, I can't believe it, which means my gas tank of morality, the amount of virtuous energy I put into my mind from past actions, hasn't run out yet, because that's the main cause of being alive. So we delight in this, thinking how marvelous, we're still alive, still got a chance to look at our minds, practice, develop our qualities, help others, one step at a time. Make the most of it today, listening to these teachings, thinking about the meaning, taking the tools to help me do that. Help myself and help others, all the way to perfection. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog. So let's do a little bit of creative thinking. Close your eyes, sit up straight. There's a kind of a classic way that all the great meditators of the past to sit that they have found to be most conducive to enable the mind to do its job, because your body doesn't meditate. It's really important to remember that. If you get nice feelings in your body, I'm very happy for you, or if you get ugly feelings, it doesn't matter. It's not the point. The mind is the point. So all the great yogis have found various things that are conducive, and the first is your legs. They all say that sitting in what they call full lotus is the very best. The body's very stable, and you can stay in months in meditation without toppling over, it seems, you know. So it also aligns all the subtler energies very nicely, so the winds can flow well, and the minds, of course, that are connected to those winds can do their job properly. So if you can't sit in full lotus position, you can sit with one leg up and the other, you know, ordinary. If you can't do that, regular, cross-legged. If you can't do that, sit in a chair. If you can't do that, lie down. I mean, do whatever you can, you know. Aim for the best and then do what you can. And as His Holiness says, and all the yogis say, it's really auspicious to start a session, if you can, in full lotus, even for a second, to create the cause for being able to do it in the future. And they say in the highest practices in Vajrayana that one needs to sit in that posture. It's a necessary component. So that's the first one. So then the second, with you know, if we cross our legs, because we're not so used to it, and our poor little legs aren't very comfortable, we have to find a cushion that's suitable. The ideal is to have something just propping up underneath your coccyx, you know, and your legs flat on the ground when you're cross-legged. So we do our best. The next one is your spine, and they all say that's really important. Your back should be ramrod straight. Think of your spine like an arrow. The head of the arrow is the coccyx, pointing directly into the earth. And then they say the shoulders should be very square. So I like to think of the entire skeleton. You think of your skeleton hanging on a hanger. It'd be ramrod straight, wouldn't it? But then all the soft bits hanging completely loose. So it's kind of have all the muscles relaxed. Flop your abdomen. We're so used to holding our abdomen tight, I think because we don't like looking fat, you know. Spend our lives squeezing our abdomen. Relax the muscles, let them flop. All the muscles relaxing, but the body upright. It's a really good combination. Then your next one is the hands. So there's many ways of doing, many gestures or mudras. The classic one we're often taught is left underneath, right on top, thumbs touching. I heard ages ago, and I don't know what my source is, that there's some subtle channels meeting at the thumbs related to bodhicitta. I've heard that somewhere. But you know, you hear about great yogis meditating with their hands like this. One finds one's way. The next thing is, all the rest of the bits is about the head. So have the head slightly forward, chin tucked in. Thrust back makes the mind agitated. Your head slightly forward, chin tucked in. Next is your lips slightly apart. The next is the tip of the tongue resting behind the top teeth. which doesn't feel very natural, but apparently it's very practical and it stops you from having to dribble. You don't have to, when you're meditating, the spit's not coming out your mouth all the time, apparently, so it's very practical. And then finally your eyes, different things that people say, but many of the yogis say best to have them open, because if you're meditating all day and all night, like the great yogis do, or at least all day, to have the light come in helps your mind keep sharp, because one of the biggest dangers when you meditate is the mind become dull. So having light come in keeps it sharp. But of course most of us are so distracted we wouldn't be able to focus. So have your eyes lightly closed, whatever, but the danger is you space out, In either case, whatever, open or closed, you have your eyes, they say, looking down as if you're looking along your nose at the ground. Now that's the classic position. You kind of settle into that the best you can. And all of us sitting in chairs, which is most of us, don't slump into the back of the chair. So hold yourself up, it's really important, and keep your feet firmly on the ground. So hold your body up, because that's what you'd be doing if you were sitting cross-legged. So don't slump into the chair, because then you just become floppy and your mind becomes dull. Hold yourself up nicely, feet firmly planted. Okay. So now, like I said, we're just going to use our creative imagination. Think about a few things. This is labeled familiarizing your mind with something, which is the meaning of meditation. Okay? So we're going to imagine in front of us the Buddha, enlightened energy, but it's in a particular form from the Bodhisattva path, and it's in a female form, and it's called Tara. She's called Tara, and she's known as the liberator from the fears of samsara. There's three main energies, if you like, or aspects of an enlightened mind. One is compassion, which is often depicted, as we know, by the Buddha Chenrezig. One is wisdom, which is depicted by the Buddha called Manjushri, Manju, gentle voice. He holds a sword with a tip of fire, and the sword cuts through ignorance. And the third one is the third quality of a Buddha. There's compassion that wishes to benefit others. There's the wisdom to know how, but you've got to have the ability to do it, which is action energy, power they call it. And Tara is a good example of that. She represents action energy. Okay, success, cutting through the obstacles, fearlessness. She's often referred to as her name is the liberator. Her name means the liberator. And she's often known as the liberator from the fears of samsara. Well, fears of samsara is a Buddhist way of saying being caught up in the neuroses and the miseries and the dramas and the anxieties and the ups and downs and the depressions and the angers and everything. That's what the fears of samsara mean. That's what they mean. And she liberates from this. So we need that energy. All of us need that energy badly. So imagine her in front. Blissful body, light body, nothing, not substantial like a statue. She's sitting, she's got a green light body. If you've seen the pictures, you're familiar. Green light body. Green is like action energy. She's utterly gorgeous. They say that all these Buddhas are like, they're just representing different psychological qualities, that's all. And they're in what they call the royal aspect, coming from India, in the kind of aristocratic royal, very gorgeous with jewels and silk and very beautiful. And then the aspect of youth, they're all about 16 years old, they're totally divine, So she's this blissful face, radiant, blissful, utterly beautiful, make the mind happy. Sweet red mouth. Her eyes, sometimes you hear her eyes, she's slightly fierce, You wouldn't cross Tara. You hear she's like that, apparently, her energy, And that's action energy. And often it's depicted as girl energy. It's girl energy, action, get on with it, do things, quick, sharp, So she's got blissful face, she's very beautiful. And you think too, before we go on further, looking how she looks, if you've got a teacher, a spiritual teacher, a lama, a guru, heavy with qualities, I've heard guru means. And Lama Yeshe would often say, because ma is the female ending in Tibetan, so even though lama is a general word, not a female word, he would say it means high mother. Lama, your guru, your spiritual teacher, the one you feel close to. You imagine it's their mind manifesting, like dressing up as the Buddha Tara for your benefit, solely for your benefit. She's trying to show us how we can become. This is the way to think. Makes it very personal. Our Lama manifesting as Tara. So she's got this beautiful face, looking at you with loving eyes. She's, got, as you see in the pictures, got this kind of five-pointed crown, like a tiara on her head. Her hair is partially held up on a top knot. You see it in the pictures, with a kind of beautifully decorated with jewels, and all her hair down the back, very crystal clear. Then she's got, she's decorated, got jewels around her throat, ears, upper arms, wrists, ankles, in this Indian style, you know, very beautiful. She's basically naked, the top part of her body is, she's got gorgeous breasts, very beautiful. Should make us blissful, you know. And we're thinking of it as a mirror image of our potential. That's the point. This energy represents action, represents compassionate, wise action. Of course, you don't know that until you're told, but that's the same as everything. You don't know the word, any word, what it means until you're told. That's the meaning of Tara. So she's got, in her right hand, her right hand is on her knee with the palm up. And she's holding between her thumb and her ring finger the stem of a blue upala flower that blooms at her right ear. Just imagine this. And this mudra her hand is in, they call it like kind of giving, you know, very generous. She's a open hand of giving things, you know. So left hand's at her heart, fingers pointing up, her left ring finger and thumb holding the stem of another blue upala flower that blooms at her left ear. And this is the mudra of, I always forget, enlightenment or something, I can't remember, sorry. So then she's kind of lower part of her body, her left leg is drawn in like she's in meditation, but her right leg is kind of resting on a little multicolored lotus. She's sitting on a multicolored lotus, and her right leg is also resting on a little multicolored lotus in this kind of action pose, not meditative, indicating she's ready to hop up to help sentient beings. That's her job, you know. Get things done, no mucking around. And we all need this badly. We're mostly paralyzed, fearful, worried, anxious, inert. We need to cut through the nonsense and get things done, have courage, you know. That's what she represents. So, okay, there she is, radiant, beautiful, dying to help us, dying to show us how we can become, thinking like this. So she very happily, so compassionately sends from her brow, she sends these powerful laser beams of white light that enter our brow, penetrate so strongly, and instantaneously fill our entire body. So first of all, what this white light does, you imagine, is completely heal this body, all the pain, all the suffering, all the heaviness, all the inability to do things, you know. This totally makes it radiant and light, full of this blissful white light. First imagine that. So delighted. But then you imagine too, this white light is what it's doing, the main thing. It's purifying, eradicating all the imprints in our consciousness of all the actions we've ever done since beginningless time with our bodies to harm sentient beings. Countless lives. Buddha says, you know, we've been animals countless lives. Animals spend their lives in unbelievable primordial fear, killing and being killed, the worst suffering of all. All these imprints in our mind. Imagine, eradicated, utterly eradicated by this blissful white light filling us. Be so delighted. She again, Lama Tara so happily, so compassionately sends radiant beams of laser white light that penetrate our brow, filling us completely, this time with our potential, our marvelous potential to benefit sentient beings, to only benefit sentient beings. Not only the potential, but that right now, so imagine, full of the marvelous potential to only benefit whoever sees us, touches us, smells us, tastes us. All the sentient beings. We can only benefit them. Imagine this. How incredible. Our own natural potential. The power of a Buddha. Full of this blissful white light, this potential. But not only that, the potential of a Buddha to manifest in countless bodies throughout countless universes for countless eons to benefit the countless suffering sentient beings. This is the job of a Buddha. This is the potential of every sentient being, my potential. Imagine this manifesting. Effortless ability to benefit sentient beings with my bodies as long as time exists, as long as suffering exists. It's my job. my potential, full of this radiant white light. And now Lama Tara so compassionately, so kindly sends from her throat radiant beams of red light that enter our throat, penetrating so strongly, instantly filling us. And first of all, eradicating all the imprints of all the actions we've ever done since beginningless time, and it would seem to be mostly as humans, of harming sentient beings with our speech. And this for us, mostly in our lives, we mightn't go around raping and killing too many people, but we surely use our garbage dump speech to harm sentient beings, you know. We lie, we say things that aren't true. But not only that, my feeling is, this is not technically lying, but we're also clever and educated, and we all love to say everything we think. We're vomiting out words that we truly think we're speaking the truth. But we're not, we're speculating, and we mislead sentient beings continuously. No control over our speech at all, no certainty that what we're saying is true. Even if it's, is that shop open at 5 o'clock? Yeah. You sure? Yes. And then you get there and it wasn't. Oh, I thought it was. We act like we know everything. We act with such certainty. We're not meaning to lie. It's so misleading. We just should shut our mouths, you know, unless we're certain. Really, it's incredible. So the lying, the speculating, add that one. Then there's all the rabbiting on about nothing, just uncontrollable vomit. Because we don't know our own minds, we need people to hear what we have to say because we don't think we're worthwhile, so we vomit out just rubbish, exhausting people. Politely it's called idle talk. I call vomiting, you know, vomiting. All that, purifying, all that, how amazing. Then there's all the harsh speech. Not everybody is abusive, but I'm very abusive, so I have to purify that one. I say rude, harsh words to people, say wretched words, 4-letter words and everything. 5-letter words, 6-letter words. All of this, harsh speech. And then the fourth one I think is our best, our favourite. Saying bad things about people behind their backs. We live to do this. We can't wait to speak about the colleague at work when we get home, speak about that sister to this sister, speak about all the politicians like it's a virtue to criticise, you know. I mean, look at the harm we're doing to ourselves, to forget the disharmony we're creating. Unbelievable, these things. Speech. So imagine, so happily, every atom of all these ridiculous imprints of this uncontrolled, harmful speech completely eradicated by this radiant red light filling us. How marvellous. And now Lama Tara, so happily, sending these radiant beams of red light from her throat that enter our throat, and this time filling us with our potential. For what? They call it the power of speech. This is Lord Buddha's main gift. You can have 47 Buddhas looking at you very sweet every day, but until they open their mouth and give you advice, nothing can change. Speech is the gift of the Buddha. So speech is our main gift to others. It's the power of speech. You know, so imagine, full of this potential, such that any sound we utter, even saying hello, will benefit whoever hears it in the most perfect way. That's the power of speech that we have the potential to accomplish. And imagine this. Whatever we say effortlessly will be wise, appropriate, compassionate. You know, imagine this. Imagine this potential. Every sound we utter is of benefit to the sentient beings who hear it. This is what we mostly have to achieve. This is the main gift we have to help others. As Lama Zopa said, you know, the act of generosity, of giving things. You could give food to every person on this planet. That's an inconceivable gift of generosity. the first of the 6 perfections, the first of the first. The second type of giving is called the giving of spiritual advice. And that doesn't have to be given from a high throne. It's just wise advice. He says one piece of wise advice to one person, which can lead them to countless future lives and enlightenment, is far more beneficial because of what it can do. You know, one piece of advice. So the speech is stupendous. So to have the wish to harness our speech, to use it, to not say negative things, to be silent and not vomit everything out until we're certain it's correct. Not to have harsh speech, all this purified, and now enabling us to have this marvelous potential to benefit others with our speech, full of this blissful potential, this blissful red light. Now Lama Tara so kindly this time sends radiant beams of laser light, blue, like the sky, that enter from her heart in the center of her chest, entering into our heart, filling us completely, first eradicating all the neuroses, all these delusions which are adventitious, Buddha's amazing finding. The ego grasping, which gives rise to this neurotic craving to get what that fantasy I wants, which gives rise to panic and aversion and depression and anger, and that when it doesn't get what it wants, which gives rise to the other rubbish, the jealousy and all the other nonsense. All of this stuff, all this hierarchy of neuroses that are adventitious, that are not at the core of our being, instantaneously eradicated. Can you imagine? Full of this blissful blue light. Incredible. And now Lama Tara sends again the blue light, this time filling us with our potential. Now there's no choice but the virtues which are at the core of our being, indestructible. The virtues, the goodness, the love, compassion, the wisdom. I mean the compassion, the empathy, all this, and of course the wisdom that sees everything as it is without mistake, non-dualistically. Well, not quite yet, but the wisdom that cuts the root of samsara and the delusions. So this is what we've done now, is purify what they call the obstacles to our liberation, and have accomplished now the liberation from suffering. Full of this blissful, radiant blue light, all the goodness within us. Now Lama Tara, this time, she sends the 3 together. And what this is going to do is purify even the subtlest imprints. I remember one time hearing that, it's like the first one is you remove the garlic from the jar, now we have to remove even the smell. The subtlest imprints, which is now removing what they call the obstacles to our omniscience. And manifesting, therefore, our Buddhahood, our Tara nature, fully manifesting. So we visualize the white simultaneously, the white from Lama Tara's brow entering our brow, the red to the throat and the blue to the heart together, manifesting our Buddhahood, our omniscience, our Tara nature fully developed. So now we imagine Lama Tara's multicolored little lotus she's sitting on, and the one that her right leg is resting on, they both just disappear into light, up into her body, just like that. And then she very happily, you imagine, comes and sits above our head, facing the same way as us. Imagine that. And now you imagine she dissolves into light and absorbs into us. We imagine the body, the energy of the body, speech and mind of the Buddha Tara, the energy of the body, speech and mind of the Guru, and my body, speech and mind, they completely become oneness. She absorbs into us and we become oneness with the energy, the body, speech and mind of our Guru and Tara. So then just kind of space out for like a minute. Imagine you're as big as the universe, no thoughts. Bliss out. Limitless, vast, blissful. And then now we think, well, now we're the Buddha, you know, what are we going to do? I mean, what's motivated us for countless lives to become a Buddha? Because a Buddha, like everything, is a dependent arising. It's the result of causes and conditions, our hard work over countless lives, we imagine. So now we've finally accomplished the goal, and so our job is naturally to help others. This is what was motivated us all this time. So we visualize in front of us all sentient beings, but divided into three categories. Right in the middle, eyeball to eyeball, the objects of your aversion, your anger, the people who've harmed you. You can think of one person if you like, whom you've not forgiven, who's been mean to you, harmful, can be very harmful. If you're brave enough, think they're right there in front of you. Then the other enemies, we can call these enemies, the objects of our aversion, in front of us, right in the middle. And then to the left, in front of you, your beloveds, the ones you adore, the objects of your attachment, basically, whom you go towards and you want to be with, your friends, the objects of attachment, the ones who do what your attachment wants, whom you therefore do have love and compassion for. The enemies are those who don't do what your attachment wants, and therefore you don't have love and compassion for them. So to the left, friends, in front of you, the left. Your friends in front, very in front, right in front, the enemies. And then 99.99999% of the rest of the universe, they're called strangers. And who are they? They're the ones who neither harm nor help us. And how do we feel about them? Couldn't care less. They could all drop dead. Doesn't matter to us. This is the universe. Monkeys and ants and dogs and rats and humans have their friends, their enemies and their strangers, because this is the way the mind works, and it's Lord Buddha's view of the mind, and it covers all sentient beings. And these are the three main delusions. And in relation to sentient beings, these are the three main categories, and it covers everybody. There's no fourth category. Friends, object of attachment. Enemy, object of aversion or anger. Stranger, object of utter indifference. So we see them to the right, to the left, behind us, as far as the horizon goes, below us, above us, the whole of the universe full. And we can say it full of all the sentient beings in all the realms, all in the form of human being, which is the form they can get enlightened in, but each of them experiencing the sufferings, their particular sufferings of their own realm of existence. For all sentient beings, pervading space. And now think, First of all, from their point of view, they are identical to each other. But each wants to be happy and each doesn't want to suffer. Secondly, they're exactly the same as me. They want to be happy, they don't want to suffer. There's not a millimeter of difference in reality. So really feeling this and knowing this as if we were the Buddha. We only, therefore, want to help every single one. We want to practice love, which is, may you be happy, and then we want to practice great love, what can I do to make them happy? We want to practice compassion, may you not suffer, and then great compassion, what can I do to take it away for every single one of these sentient beings? No doubt. So from our hearts we imagine trillions and trillions of little green taras emanate out, first into the hearts of the enemies, and we actually see them removed of their pain, their neuroses, their suffering, full of happiness. The friends, the strangers, the same. Little green taras emanating out to the front, to the sides, above, below, behind, wanting this for every single sentient being, wanting to make them happy, wanting to take away their suffering, and finally wanting them to become their Tara, achieve their natural potential for Buddhahood. So for about a minute, intensively imagining this, wanting this, thinking this, delighting in this. So as one more minute, we will now sing Tara's mantra, which is just really a sound manifestation of the same energy that we visualize. Also Tara, but as sound. These syllables, we'll just sing a few times. If you know, you can join in. If not, just listen and imagine, even as we're singing the mantra, continuing to send out the Taras, but also as the mantra goes out, it rains down green light that blesses all these beings. Imagining this. Om Tare Tu Tare Ture Svaha. 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 So imagine all these beings transformed into their own Tara. So delighted. So now finally we imagine all of them dissolve into green light, and from all directions all absorb into me. Just imagine this, enhancing even more marvelously your own Tara nature. Just finish with that, imagining. And now we finish with the little prayer, this aspiration is called the 4 immeasurable thoughts. We think, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could be free of suffering and could abide in equanimity, free of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. May they abide so. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Tara, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could be free of suffering and its causes. May they be free. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Tara, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have them. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Tara, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from higher rebirths. What is it? Never separated from liberation's excellent bliss. May they never be separated. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Tara, bless me to be able to do this. Okay, relax. So remembering that, as Buddha says, every single millisecond of every thought we have sows a seed. So we just sowed the seeds of the entire path to enlightenment right there, you know. So we're not used to thinking of practice like this in our culture. I think if we did that meditation and we had a very nice feeling and tears came, we would say, oh, I had a good meditation. But if we sat there kind of bored and irritated, we think, well, that was a lousy meditation. That's not the criterion of a good or bad meditation. The Buddhist view is whatever you think sows seeds. So, you know, it's like if you go out to do the gardening and you're feeling with a big fat headache, you feel miserable, but you do your gardening. The seeds get planted no matter whether you feel good or bad. I don't care. You plant the seeds. Same here. It's a very different view of practice, you know. We're very addicted in the West to thinking it's all about experience. You sit down, you have a gooey feeling, I had an experience. It's completely not the point. As you progress, you're going to get very good experiences, but that's just the byproduct. The point is what you're doing with your mind and the seeds you're sowing, and you're gathering in this one, you're gathering the seeds and getting the momentum and having the inspiration to want to practice the entire path to enlightenment from A to Z, you know. We practice being ordinary, completely purifying all delusions, becoming the Buddha, and then enlightening all sentient beings. Unbelievable meditation, you know. Be very delighted just that we did the thoughts, and all those thoughts have gone in. We've sown those seeds. There's no thought we ever have that goes away, unless we pull it out, you know. So be very delighted. Okay. What time is it? Lunchtime already? Not quite. Okay. Okay, so listen, what are we going to talk about today? Well, that was all the compassion path sort of thing. That was all the compassion business, you know. And that prayer at the end, this lovely aspiration of the Bodhisattva. I will make it happen. That's the courage of the Bodhisattva. Of course, the eye's empty. Don't get worried. It's the courage of the Bodhisattva. So let's look at compassion then. All yesterday we talked about the wisdom wing. Junior school, about controlling your body and speech, living in vows. We'll talk about purification as well, which is part of junior school. We'll do that. But then and then high school about being your own therapist, knowing your own mind, understanding the delusions, looking at the delusions, lessening them, and then we went even into emptiness. And if you'd graduated at high school, which is what stuff we talked yesterday, and you realized emptiness and perfected that, you would have achieved your own liberation. You'd say bye-bye and you wouldn't come back. But if you're on the Bodhisattva path, you're going to come back, even if you don't need to, and you're going to now head into university, which is the compassion wing. So the point is, you cannot have proper compassion until you can get in the junior school and high school, which is known as renunciation, which sounds very forbidding to us, very depressing, you know. Renunciation, giving things up. But all we're giving up is two things: suffering and its causes. I mean, how delightful. That's what you're renouncing. You know, as Lama Zopa said, when we hear that we have to give up attachment, we go, oh, I've got to give up my heart. I've got to give up my happiness. That's how we hear it, you know. So mistaken. And so you think, how would you be if you had even some semblance of renunciation? You wouldn't walk around with a long face looking depressed. No, on the contrary, you'd be this blissful, happy, content person. Content being the key word. Fulfilled. That means you'd be joyful. You'd be content, which means you'd be less attached, less neurotic, less angry, less depressed, less jealous. That means more kind, more friendly, more loving, more compassionate, naturally. I mean, who wouldn't want to be that? That's what we want to be. That's our real person. And not even got more to go yet. That's just renunciation to some degree. Forget real renunciation. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we have got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so disgusting. It's like being in a septic tank. Or like using used toilet paper. And so think about that. That's obviously where way to go. Attachment's our default mode. So don't be depressed by it, just realize how deep attachment is, that's all. So renunciation, way to go. Forget realization of emptiness, forget bodhicitta. I mean, don't forget, but just give them, the appropriate respect they need, their heavy duty, serious realizations. But we have the potential. And it doesn't matter how, so I say, it doesn't matter whether your journey's 10 million miles. Once you've got a map, you can relax. If you haven't got a map and your journey's 1 mile, you're in trouble because you're lost. So having a map gives us courage. That's up to us to find the map, or to even like this map here. It's up to you to choose this map. But once you know you're on the map, then you just keep plodding along, one step at a time, That's it. Following the instructions, ticking the boxes, moving along. But we mostly are in a state of panic. We never know where we are. We don't know where we've come from. We don't know where we're going. We're always confused, always like we're lost, So we've really got to settle down, and this is why this packaging of the teachings that Lama Tsongkhapa put together, based on Atisha, this so-called Lam Rim, this course to Buddhahood, is extremely helpful to know. So renunciation, junior school and high school. Now you go to compassion. So basically you can't have valid compassion, ticking all the boxes, which I'll talk about, until you've got valid renunciation. Or in other words, the extent to which you have any renunciation is the extent to which your compassion can be valid. It's progressive, So what's compassion? Well, Buddha's got a very different take on it. So once you understand the components of renunciation, and there are two, then you'll understand real compassion. Let's explain. So renunciation, which is about yourself, it's about you, understanding your suffering, which means understanding the first noble truth, and there are 3 kinds of suffering. Then understanding the second noble truth, what are the causes of suffering. So then renunciation has these 2 parts. You know what suffering is, and we're talking the 3 kinds, which takes some thinking about. The suffering of suffering in your face. No one has to be taught to not want that one. We all don't like the punches in the nose. The second one's really hard to see because that's what we call happiness. So the first suffering is when an attachment doesn't get what it wants, but the second suffering is when attachment does get what it wants. That's the tricky part. So to understand that intelligently really needs thinking and careful thinking, not just glossing over the words, because it's not evident to us what that is until we think about it. And then, of course, the subtlest one, all-pervasive suffering, they call it. So understanding these to some degree, and the point is, knowing you're sick of it. You've got to be sick of suffering. We all know that. You won't stop eating too much food until you're sick of being overweight, or you're sick of getting sick. You've got to get that tipping point where you're fed up with it. And sometimes we have to wait until we're really fed up before we get the lesson, So we can all say relatively we're sick of suffering, but the crucial piece that until we get this, nothing will change, is now finally we know why we are suffering. And for the Lord Buddha, that's 2 simple points. given that everything is dependent arising, given that everything in the universe that we know about, that we can see and taste and touch and smell, is a product of the dependent arising, the first level, which is causes and conditions. We all know everything is a product of causes and conditions. So the number of causes and conditions that you have to put together just to produce a flower be a long list, you know. We know that. Well, it's exactly the same for Buddha's expertise. Isn't about flowers. I'm sure he'd be a good botanist, but that's not his deal. His deal when it comes to causes and conditions is happiness and suffering. Happiness and suffering. That's his expertise. He says the law of karma is all about that. So he lays out what he said, his own findings about the causes, the main causes of suffering. And then by implication, the main causes of happiness. So indeed, for a moment of happiness or a moment of suffering, which is a dependent arising, which is a phenomenon that does exist, like a flower, like the action of killing a mouse, like a moment of happiness, they're all phenomena, they're all objects of knowledge, they are an existent. And they all have many causes. So to produce one moment of suffering, many, many, many causes and conditions have to come together. But Buddha narrows it down to two main causes in the Second Noble Truth. He pinpoints these because they're the main ones, such that when we know this, and we stop sowing the seeds of these two, that is the beginning of the ending of suffering. So we understand causes and conditions. So, you know, my friend Chodron punches me in the nose. As far as I'm concerned, I'm suffering because she punched me in the nose. That's the world. We can deduce that's the logic of the world, isn't it? We can see kangaroos, ants, humans all believe this. Look at the world. Look at the world. We all believe totally as a scientific truth that that person, that event, that food, that thing, that word, that is the main cause of my suffering. We don't say it like that, but it's might as well, because that's how we all behave. Our behavior indicates this. That's our philosophy now. Buddha says that's the philosophy of samsara, and he says it's a mistaken philosophy. He says very simply, Chodron is not the main cause of my suffering. This is shocking to us, you know. When I say it so extreme, it's shocking to hear it in our culture. I'd be sued if I said that in certain situations. So don't tell on me. That the rapist is not the main cause of your suffering. That abusive husband is not the main cause of your suffering. This is shocking to hear. Too terrifying, because that's our philosophy. All of our model of the mind, our scientific views, all reinforce that philosophical view. So Buddha's simply arguing with it, that's all. He's allowed to. So saying that they're not the main cause doesn't mean they're not one of the causes. Of course they are. And indeed it is wrong to rape, kill, badmouth, cheat, etc. This is called immorality. Buddha's first starting point is what is a negative action and what is a positive action. So of course Buddha agrees it's a negative action on the side of the person who did it. But all he's saying is, because he has this explanation of why it's happening, and we don't have that in our culture. And that, I think, is why in our culture we suffer so mightily. Because when bad things happen, our main pain, and we can't get past it, is why is this happening? We can't get past that. That's why we are so tortured. This shouldn't be happening. I don't deserve this. That's natural. We all understand that. That's natural response when you have the view that your mother made you, that you didn't ask to get born, and indeed you haven't harmed that person in this life. They came out of the blue and harmed you. So it's completely reasonable deduction that, you know, why is this happening and I don't deserve it. Now that's the philosophical view we have, and we believe it's scientifically true. That's why we suffer, Buddha says. That's why we suffer. I'm not going to say to panic. But as far as Buddha's concerned, they are merely the catalyst. That's all. Not saying it's good. The world is acutely suffering. People do terrible things to each other all the time, and we must do everything we can to alleviate suffering. That's our job on the Bodhisattva path. And this is why it's so fascinating, that question that we often have, which came yesterday, and that came the day before. In other words, the question we have is, well, it follows, as me putting it, it follows that if I'm the main cause of why you punch me in the nose, why should I help you? That's how we think, meaning our assumption is that suffering is a random event that has no cause as far as the victim is concerned, because our compassion at the moment is profoundly limited. It's only for innocent victims. That's a default for us. So Buddha has a different view, that's the point. He says, as we're saying, every single sentient being in this universe, every millisecond, is just naturally experiencing the fruits of their past handiwork. That garden, your life, whatever's in it, by definition, you put it there. The weeds are yours and the flowers are yours. Of course, we're talking the weeds here, which is why it's painful. But all we've got to do is start to think of all the good things in our life, all the fact that we're human, that we've got a decent body, reasonable life, reasonable money, reasonable friends, reasonable home, have a wish to become better people. We should be in bliss of tears of delight at the fruits of our past virtue. So we should be blissful with ourselves, how amazingly good we are. But the irony of ego is we're addicted to the negative, you know. But we have to understand it from the Buddha's view. And this is the basis of proper compassion. So, okay, when you've got this renunciation, when you know what suffering is, and you're up to here with suffering, and now, though, you've hit the bullseye, you know now finally what caused it. Your past actions and your ridiculous delusions. So like it's a wake-up call, and as an adult, you're a grown-up, you take responsibility. It's accountability. Guilt is not accountability. Guilt, which is our default mode, oh, you mean I'm a bad person? We go kill ourselves, you know, which is the natural response we have, because that's the irony of ego. It runs to blame. You either blame someone else or you blame yourself, and that's called anger. And that's not a valid response at all. So this one of accountability is profound. It's like grown up. Okay, I'm the boss, you know. I did it. What an idiot. But when you rejoice in your good things, you're proud to own those. Then it makes it easy peasy to own the rubbish, you know. So one, I'm sick of suffering, and two, now finally I know why. Past karma and delusions. When you got that, that's renunciation, and you become joyful. You're on the case. You watch your body, speech and mind like a hawk. You love to live in your vows. You love to practice morality, because you know that anything else will cause you more suffering, and you already know you're fed up with it. We know this when it comes to things like food. We are geniuses to know exactly what food causes suffering and what causes happiness. And once we've got it down, what causes suffering, we will avoid at all costs. We have such discipline, and it's called self-respect. That's all Buddha's saying. But when it comes to actions of body, speech and mind. And this takes time to get to, because we're like children, because we're into the blame, punishment mode, you know. We've got to change that. It's a view. We've got to change it in our minds. Think it through logically. Once we've got that for ourselves, one, I'm up to here with suffering, and two, I now know why, that's what transforms your life. That's when you grow up and become accountable, and now you will only want to sow virtuous seeds and refrain at all costs from sowing negative. Not because you're going to get punished. No interest. No one's going to punish you. There is no punisher. That's not Buddha's deal. You're the boss here, baby. Now you're ready for compassion, because compassion has exactly the same two components. The difference is it's others instead of you. One, you see the world. You see the victims, yes. And you see the perpetrators. You see the wackos, the terrorists, the pedophiles, those evil priests who, you know, jump on little children. The terrorists, the murderers, the rapists, you name the worst of the worst you can think of on this earth. The ones we love to hate. We know now why they're doing it. And we know why the victim is getting suffering. And we know we're all in the same boat, and we've been going for countless lives. One life victim, one life perpetrator. One life victim, one life perpetrator. It's like a bad dream. And then you realise why they're all suffering, and that they're causing themselves suffering. So you actually have more compassion for the pedophile than the victim. The victims just finished their suffering, which they caused. And you have such compassion for them. But the perpetrator is just beginning countless lives of unbearable suffering. So your heart breaks for him. But you cannot have that view until you've got renunciation, which is this view for yourself. So it's progressive. So don't go anywhere near compassion if you're not ready. We love the sound of compassion. It sounds so cute, you know. It's intense. I can't even bear to talk about this bodhicitta these people talk about. They're mad. It's too high. I tell you. I can't cope. I'd rather play safe and talk about emptiness. That's easier. That's easier than bodhicitta, I tell you. I get a nervous breakdown talking about bodhicitta, you know. It's too outrageous. When you hear the level to which you can have this kind of compassion, the level to which we can have compassion is outrageous. It's like smashes, atomic bomb, you know, on all the delusions. Unbelievable, the way they say. Still living, these amazing beings. When you look at these holy beings, you know, His Holiness, Lama Zopa, anyone else we know who's, you know, these holy beings. It's outrageous behavior. Utterly opposite to the world's behavior. Utterly opposite. If we could articulate the things that they say and think, they'd be locked up and imprisoned for being mentally ill in our culture, with our views. So like one of the classic texts, little text, boring little title, 8 verses it's called. They usually have very flowery titles. This is so boring. 8 verses they call it, for God's sake. So unpoetic. And it's even called the 8 verses of mind training. It sounds like a military manual, you know. Mind training. There's a whole genre of practices in the compassion wing that are said to be the more advanced level of smashing ego in order to get compassion. Because obviously the obstacle to compassion is ego. Obviously. Ego and its you know, and its servants. They're the obstacles. So the first stages, they're the obstacles for you to get what you want, which is your happiness, so you have to rip them to pieces. But now they're the obstacles to you helping others, which becomes the main focus for the great bodhisattvas, you know. And this level, the one of, they say, this one of mind training, or there's a whole approach within that genre called exchanging self for others. Learning to cherish others more than self. It's like insane. So this little text, it's shocking. When you read the words, it's shocking. I can hardly read them, I tell you. Well, I mean, of course, we say them all with a kind of a poetic little holy voice, and we read the 8 verses. Oh yes, we read every day these verses. May, you know, there's like in our Lama Chirpa text is a verse that says, you know, who even kills me, lies to me, steals from me, may I work for their benefit in return for their harm. We say these words every day, not having a clue what we're saying. I'll change the subject, I think. So anyway, these verses, the second verse, and they get worse each verse until the, you know. The second verse says something like, now this is really shocking, and you've got to be careful who you say this to. It says, when you're with others, see yourself as the lowest of all. I mean, if any therapist gave you that advice, you could, I think, happily sue them. And I'm really not kidding. I'm trying to make the point that we say these words so nicely, as if, oh yeah, may I, blah, blah, blah. We don't really hear what they're saying, you know. And it's not the worst yet. The second line says, and see them as superior. Not just you, the lowest, but everybody else as superior. It says that. So you've got to try even intellectually understand where that's coming from and why that's a piece of advice and for whom is it appropriate. Well, as Venerable Robina says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, that you need to be a suitable vessel to take on board this level of practice. And it's not kidding. You know, if you're a typical, join the universe here, victim in a relationship that's lousy, you're the victim and you've got a bully partner and you're full of fear and full of low self-esteem and full of self-hate, typical, normal human being, right? And you're miserable, you're depressed, you're worried, you can't make any choices, you run back like a moth to a flame to this garbage dump partner, moan and complain about it to everybody else. This is typical life, look at us. This advice is not for you. Way too advanced, I promise. Way, way too advanced. The advice for you is to get some courage to actually have enough self-respect to say, hey babe, bye, and go. That's the advice for you. This is outrageous advice. So in other words, who is the person who's qualified to even begin to have this attitude, to even dare to say, may I try this? Is a person who's done junior school and high school, who's got incredible renunciation, who already has done incredible work in understanding what compassion is. Already phenomenally highly advanced. This is the highest of the advanced teachings in the Bodhisattva path. So we've really got to understand, and this is why it's so important, you know, that when we read all let's say in the Tibetan tradition, you read all the teachings, we tend to sort of put them all in one big pile and they're all spiritual, you know. But like if you were studying music, instantaneously you looked at that piece, you'd be able to recognize, wouldn't you, what level it is. Is it grade 1, grade 12, grade 2? But crucially, you'd know where you're at in relation to that piece of music. So you either have already accomplished it, or you haven't got there yet, or you've gone beyond it. There's only 3 options. You're either, that's your level, you haven't achieved it yet, or you've gone beyond it. That's it. So if it's a grade 5 piece and you're only at grade 4, it's too advanced for you. If you're in grade 12 and you see it, you've done it already. So you've got to know that the Lamrim, this gradual path, this course to Buddhahood, like all courses, is gradual, is incremental. We hear these words, but we still don't get the penny to drop. And that means, just like a book of music, you could randomly choose any page and you would know exactly that level. It'll tell you for a start what level, but you'd know straight away. And this is something we're not used to thinking when it comes to spiritual. It really takes time, you know. With mathematics it's the same. With cooking it's the same. With every expertise, you know it's all presented logically in an orderly way according to the capacity of the student. It's kind of obvious. And you'd have to know where you're at. You go to a yoga school, you've got to know what level is that yoga class. Everybody, we all think this naturally. This is the approach that the Tibetans have presented in this amazing, especially Tsongkhapa in his packaging. So that means we have to understand. And that means, you know, you do an experiment. You open up anybody got any teachings here? A book? Teaching, a Dharma book? I'll do an experiment for you. Show and tell. Not a prayer book. No, prayer book's no good. What's that? That'll do. Let me have a look at it. Yeah. What's this one? Well, that's meant to be A5. How come it got to be A4? Who printed it? Where's our node? Oh, you print yourself. I'm sorry, forgive me. Oh, you did your own on your own machine. You're very allowed to have A4, darling. Okay, so listen, I'm going to open up a page, any page, and I'll read a word. Oh, God. I keep saying Sanskrit words, I can't read them. Okay, transcendent wisdom. What grade is that in? What, first, second, or third scope? Is that junior school, high school, or university? Huh? Well, actually, it's a high school teaching, but it's taught in the Mahayana in the context of the university. But it's a high school teaching. That's why you can graduate at high school and achieve your own liberation, because you realize emptiness. So technically, wisdom is a high school teaching, because that's how you realize emptiness, and that's how you get out of samsara. That's how you achieve your own nirvana if you're on the Hinayana path. But it's taught in the context of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva, which is why it's known as the perfection of wisdom. It's taught in the context in union with bodhicitta. So you kind of half got it right. All these furry words. What is it? It's all strange words. I don't understand any of them. Yeah, another one. What's that? Yeah, that'll do. Heart Sutra, that's better. Take that one. Oh, it's all about emptiness, so it's all the same though. That's no good either. Okay. Now basically, you know, okay, you open a book, you read the word karma, you know it's junior school. You read the word purification, you know it's junior school. Generally speaking, it's taught there. You read the word attachment, you know that's about the mind, which is high school. You read the word compassion, you know it's university. You read the word love, you know it's university. They're all mixed together, you talk about, but you've got to know where the teachings belong, and crucially, like any course, you've got to know where you're at. So most of us haven't even accomplished grade 1 yet. not accomplished it, but it's okay. Move one step at a time. But we've got to know, and once you know the structure of all the teachings, that means every word of Buddha's teachings has to fit into that structure. There can't be bits of music that don't fit into a grade. That's kind of bizarre, They've got to fit into the structure, and we've got to become familiar with the structure. So when you've got more coherence and logic, when you start to understand the teachings and you know where they're at, you've got to learn this. Then you kind of can calm down a bit because you know what you're doing. So important. So anyway, these 8 verses are from the more advanced level of achieving bodhicitta, the more outrageous one, where it's called exchanging self for others. It's the brave attitude of the bodhisattva, who will do anything to eradicate the delusions, the self-centeredness, the self-cherishing, as they call it in Tibetan. We'd call it selfishness. So that's a very nice term, actually, self-cherishing, isn't it? A friend of mine, she first came to a course in Vermont. It was about self-cherishing, and she'd never been to Buddhism before. She thought, oh, what a nice idea. I'd love to cherish myself. She got a big surprise. So we call it selfishness or self-centered. They call it self-cherishing. So the goal in this more radical level is to make this paradigm shift where others become more important. And that's the first, when you really accomplish that, that's the first moment of bodhicitta. When they say no longer does the ordinary thought of I even arise in the mind. I mean, this is truly for us inconceivable, and that would be truly, really, not sarcastic when I say this, that would be considered profound mental illness in our culture. Because our view, all the psychological models in our culture, take the dualistic, neurotic I as the basis of health, of mental health. I'm not being horrible about this. So it's quite shocking to hear this. That's why we've got to think about it carefully and understand what's being said logically, not emotionally. Because people can pretend to cultivate all this and can go crazy. People go mad if they don't understand all this stuff properly. These teachings, called exchanging self for others, were kept secret because they were so outrageous, so totally against the world. As Milarepa said, you can guarantee you know what Dharma is because it's the exact opposite of whatever the world thinks. It's easy, So the second verse, when you're with others, see yourself as the lowest of all, and even see them as superior. This is too much, I'd say. It's like, obviously the person who wrote this little gentleman called Langri Tangpa, this Tibetan chap, I think he was a student of Drong Pompa, who was a student of Atisha. And it was Atisha who brought these outrageous teachings, where he received them from his guru Selingpa, where he spent years in Indonesia, near this place in Sumatra. Apparently Vajrayana was flourishing there for centuries. That's where their Borobudur, that place, We do a pilgrimage there. This is marketing now. We did a little 5-day course there. Next June we're going to Borobudur. It's a very interesting place. Anyway, so he lived near Sumatra, with Selingpa. He spent years there. Then he went back to India, and then he was invited to Tibet, this Mr. Atisha, in the 11th century. So he kept these teachings. He received all this stuff from Selingpa, who got it, from, this is the 11th century. He was part of this amazing Nalanda tradition, which His Holiness always mentions is the tradition of all of our teachings coming from our lamas, carried on from the Nalanda tradition, the 7th, 11th century in India. This amazing monastery. We do another pilgrimage. This is another advertisement. We do a pilgrimage every year that raises money for the prison project. We go to all these places where Lord Buddha put his feet. We start in Kathmandu, then we go to where he was born, where he meditated, this wonderful place called Pravasti. Beautiful place where you can meditate really nicely, where Buddha spent all his rains retreats with his disciples. Then we go to where he became enlightened, where he taught his first teachings and where he passed away. It's a blissful, blissful time. Pilgrimage. We do that every year as well. That's in November next year. There's 2 advertisements. Okay? Hopping in the chance. So anyway, one of the places we go is Nalanda. It's just the most marvelous place, I tell you. There's this vast ruins of this amazing university. They say it's like only a 10% of the whole place, and it's like acres, acres, or 10,000. I'd say all would have been boys, or monks probably, unless there's some girls dressed up as monks. I'm sure a few girls got in dressed up as monks. And they gradually came from all over Asia. And this extraordinary Mahayana, Vajrayana tradition, and of all our great lineage lamas, and our masters and our texts all come from the great people there. So Atisha's stuff, Selingpa coming out of that, and then coming back to Tibet and keeping these teachings secret. And And eventually John Tompa's disciples were the ones, his main disciple, and Lungri Tampa's one of his disciples, they began to make them more public. And I mean, it sounds peculiar to us to say this is secret. We think of Vajrayana as secret, but teachings on how to develop compassion, secret? Well, yeah, because the natural, normal world would not say to see yourself as the lowest of all. It's too insane. So what's it mean? What's the point? We've got to hear it properly. It's really intense. So my feeling is it's not possible just to actually say, may I be the lowest of all. We don't even know where to go with that. It's too much, you know. So we have to try and comprehend the person writing this has to be sincere in his words. That means he has to have accomplished. I mean, obviously a person who wrote a piece of music has to accomplish that music. You can't write music if you haven't accomplished it. Well, clearly Lungri Tangpa has accomplished this, which is how come he can say it. So the best we can do is imagine what that could be like. So you have to aim for it, you know. So my feeling is already incredible just to think, you know, in your own self, when you're with some people, even later, it's too much while you're there because we're also self-conscious, but even later to think, or while you're there, if you can, to think, my feeling is, of at least a few people you're with, let's say a few friends for a meal, and think of each one of them, think of a good quality that's better than you. I think that's already stupendous. That's a good start. It has to be that to make sure that you know they're better than you. Now, right now, you know, if we look into our mind, look at our delusions, even with our best friends, we can't help but be critical. It's natural. It's embarrassing to admit it. But all the time, you're talking to your friend, she's chatting away, and you're smiling and listening, but part of you is saying, you know, your delusions are saying, oh God, she's talking a bit much this time, or she does talk too much, or her lipstick's a bit red, or she's getting a bit fat, she's got double chins, you know, but you're smiling, listening. But the delusions, they're naturally there. We can't stop the delusions. This is natural samsara. So we can see this. And then, of course, you rush home and tell your hubby about it, which makes it more strong. Then you smile when you see your friend. I mean, we're all schizophrenic, you know. So it's really beneficial, I think, simply when you're with your friend, even one friend, you know, more than one's too much. Think, especially if you find yourself criticizing her, especially someone at work you don't like. Oh my God, what a practice. Unbelievable. Think of something about that person, the person you hate. It's such a profound practice. One little thing that's better than you. You know, I'm embarrassed to admit all these things. When I was younger, you know, at school, because I was obsessed with bodies and things, I'd always notice everybody's shapes and their legs and their hair and their ears and their eyelashes, you know. Do you understand? And then you always compare. So I was so jealous of Annalise Schofiel's hair. You know? When I did Kung Fu, and this is years later when I was already old. I'm now confessed it. I never talked about it. You know, I'm very arrogant about my feet. I've got very good Kung Fu feet. They're short and fat and my toes are even shaped. So I'd go to classes. I mean, I was so embarrassed. I'm sorry if your feet are long and skinny. I'm sorry. I'm going to insult you. But I'd be looking at because everybody's feet's naked, right? I'd check everyone's feet. And I'd be judging them in relation to my feet. And my feet came out the best every time. Are you communicating with me? And it's all automatic. You're doing it underneath while you're behaving nicely and talking to people. You're not walking around. I mean, sometimes when you're very deluded, you can see it with other people, and they look at you, you can tell what they're thinking, and they can't hide it, you know. Do you understand? It's never stopping, never stopping. So me, for the best exercise was to check and say, Paulette, to myself, you've got the best feet, Paulette. Better than mine. Are we communicating here? This is just one. To see yourself as the lowest of all is just extremely too high. I'm sorry. You can say it, but it's like pathetic words, you know. You don't even know what you're supposed to feel. And the best we can think is I'm supposed to feel like a martyr. Oh, I'm such a creep. Because that's already what we think anyway. Hey, mate, I already think I'm the lowest of all. We can't even hear the virtuous way to think that way. So we do the best we can with it, cautiously, carefully. So it's authentic, not just something glossed over as a holy sounding word with all slurping away with your hands in the prayer mudra. It's intense. The next verses, as I said, they get worse. There's a verse that basically there's three that are related to how you get harmed by others. So the next one is, I think it says, what's the next one? When you notice around the world When you notice, they say people of evil nature. I mean, we don't talk that way, I'm sorry. We say the psychopaths. Is it not the term we use? The psychopath. The people, especially in our world, I mean, you can imagine in Tibet in the 10th century, 11th century, it was a fairly low-key place. You wouldn't have seen too many psychopaths, maybe one or two, you know? Or even people who might have been a little bit naughty. Do you understand? It's just relative. So in our world, I mean, it's like completely like we are living in an insane asylum. Is it not true? Yes. I mean, it's amazing. If we leapt from the 11th century to now, we'd all have a mental breakdown. We'd think we'd be in hell. You know? But this is just normal human nature. We see so many and hear every day about truly unhappy, suffering, demented, evil people. So here, the point is to see them, to have compassion for them, to be so happy you found them. So what does this mean? If we take the view, which is the point here, that we're going to do everything we possibly can to accomplish, to smash my self-cherishing and to want to cherish others most. So it's obvious that the best way to attack your self-cherishing is to choose the worst person, the one who attacks it most. It's obvious. So you see, this is where it's gradual. In the very first level of practice, there's no talk about loving others. There's no talk about compassion yet. Excuse me. There's not even any talk about looking at your mind. It's simply backing off and behaving nicely. So now you can begin to see your delusions. You go to high school and you start to work with the delusions and harness them. But you can basically say the wisdom wing is your business. You back off and leave sentient beings alone, please. Back off and leave them alone. Get out of their heads. They are not your business. That is the way to say what the wisdom wing is. Everything that happens out in the world, as far as the wisdom wing level of practice is concerned, it's merely a catalyst for you to see your mind. But delusions are like these vultures that only want to see all go out there. All the delusions do is pick and choose, go and rip things to pieces out there. Attachment grasps at this, anger criticizes that. We spend all our lives vomiting through our delusions, you know. So here we're reversing the energy of the bomb. And everything out there, as far as the wisdom is concerned, is to help me see my garbage. When you read the paper, you know, one of my favorite sayings to myself, I have two sayings when I read all the papers, and I read plenty of papers. I always show off. My monthly reading is Vanity Fair and Vogue. I love Vogue. And then my weekly reading is Economist, Newsweek, and The New Yorker. And my daily reading is the Financial Times, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Melbourne Age, and I forget some others. But anyway, I like reading about human beings. You know, it's my job. So from the wisdom wing point of view, this is again a crucial way to be able to know how to interpret the world. There's a way of interpreting the world when it comes to compassion, and there's a way of interpreting the world when it comes to the wisdom wing. We've got to know the difference. So the wisdom wing approach, which is where you're working on your mind, is every time I read, and you read plenty of psychopaths, the politicians every day, the wackos, the evil companies, the thieves on Wall Street, the poor people, the police, all the things, never stopping all these crazy stories of human beings. It's the richest, most delicious thing to read, because it's like you're learning to be a surgeon, and you're learning about bodies, and you can't wait to see every disgusting disease. Because now you can see it. Oh, there's cancer, there's this. You're so happy to see it because now you recognize it. And I say to myself two things. No matter how evil the people are, I say to myself, I recognize that. And then I say to myself, thank you for showing me how not to be. That's the wisdom wing approach. Then you really can shut your mouth. Then you are really happy to see garbage out there because it shows you the delusions that are causing you suffering, because there's no delusions in them that you do not have. No way. So this is a rich, 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 rich practice, I tell you, to learn so deeply about your own mind, because there is nothing out there that's not in you. And then already even that is connecting you to others, helping you have compassion, because they're not, the biggest one delusions do is look at those people out there. We're obsessed with criticizing, obsessed with finding fault, which means obsessed with separating ourselves from others, which is the worst arrogance. So the wisdom wing it's like compassion too, because you're seeing they're all the same as you. But you see them in you first, you own them. Thank you for showing me how not to be. I recognize that. And there's no wacko that I can't see the delusions of, that I don't see in me. Mr. Trump, all these idiot people, you know. You just see his mind, you go tick, tick, tick. There's attachment, reputation, attachment to this, anger, pride, arrogance, jealousy, boom, boom, boom. It's not complicated. You see a line, it's the same. Not complicated. Buddha's view is very clear. That's the wisdom wing. You learn about your mind, and you take responsibility, you realize what's causing you suffering. Now the compassion wing, you look at the same story, but you bring out your new way of interpreting. And you go, oh my God, because you've seen the karma, you've seen delusions, and now you know why they're suffering, and now you can have infinite compassion for Mr. Trump, infinite compassion for that other bloke, infinite compassion for the psychopaths and the wackos and the pedophiles. Truly, that's how it works, you know, one step at a time. All there laid out. So, wisdom wing is back off and mind your own business and learn about your own mind. Then you've got compassion wing, which is now you've learned this to some extent. You can afford to be around sentient beings, and they are now grist for your mill, because now your job is to develop compassion. And that means the more suffering you see, the better. The more suffering, the more wacko, the more psychopathic, the more demented, the more crazy, the more harmful, the more delicious grist for your mill for you to develop huge compassion. And that's the highest level of compassion. We do our best, you know. So then when you read about psychopaths, like they say, you think you've found a precious treasure. Why? Only not because you want them to suffer, because you've seen the depth of their suffering, and that is going to encourage your compassion for them. That's why. If you just play safe and see a few little mice hurt, a few little doggy woggies, because that's the only level of compassion we have now. We love to have compassion for innocent victims, and that precisely means children and animals. That's about it. That's not compassion, that's sentimental. Now forgive me, it is compassion, but it's very limited. Very limited. So here is like outrageous compassion, over the top. But if you're not ready for that, if you're still only a victim, back off and see them as monsters and keep a distance, please. You've got to know where you're at. Know where you're at, you know. And the next verse, I think I've got them mixed up here, but this one gets very close to home. Basically, it's when the... Huh? What happened?
I have them here if you like.
Oh, okay, I see. Oh, no, it's tea time. I forgot tea time altogether. Maybe we cancel tea. I don't know. You want tea? We better have tea. Thanks. Okay. Go and have tea, okay? I'm so sorry. I forgot all about tea. You have some tea, okay? For sentient beings.
Generally, we're not, as patients, we're not going to Buddhist psychologists, and therefore the general psychologist who's coming from a Christian or perhaps a Jewish background is not going to understand that. So they're going to tend to say to you, you've got to put yourself before you put others.
That's right.
Right.
But then what I'm saying is, most of us are so neurotic, that is the first thing we must do. Because right now we think we're creeps, we want to kill ourselves, we think we're the blame for everything, and even if we think everybody else is the blame, it's still self-pity. So we've got to kind of, my feeling is we've got to get some self-respect. They don't say it like that in Buddhism, but you've got to get some self-respect, which is actually what comes from understanding karma. You start to realize you're in charge of your life, which is self-respect. Then that's the person who can afford to put others first.
Okay, it occurs to me that some of the Dharma teachers practice metta, loving kindness meditation, for quite a number of years to develop that, to cultivate.
It's a very common practice in Buddhism, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
I think we ought to, you know, go for it. I mean, you know, yeah, whatever. Yes. Who? Go, darling. Go, Alexander. The microphone. The microphone. Yes, sweetheart.
So my question is, when you qualify to help, for example, murderer, or for example, a husband that abused you, so when we feel like we are at that level...
So sorry, what do you know? We're not talking about helping people yet. We're talking about changing our attitude first. We're not discussing helping them. They have to want to be helped. We're not discussing helping another person yet. We're discussing our view of that person.
Okay.
Forgiving the ex-husband, having compassion for the pedophile. That's what we're talking here. We're not trying to talk about helping them. That's another discussion. Are you seeing the difference?
Yes. Okay, so my next question, I don't understand the pervasive suffering. Can you just give me an example?
It means, okay, if we can understand that the realm of existence that we're born into, the Buddha would refer to it as a desire realm. And we've got to understand that in reference to what Buddha says is the possibility of not having to be reborn. His reference point is that we can be out of samsara altogether. That's a hard one for us to think about, because in the human world, all we are is a human. You get born and you die. There's no other context. So the framework for the Buddha The reference point for the Buddha, for all his teachings, is the first goal, the wisdom wing goal, is to stop creating negative karma, realize emptiness, and quit being reborn. So that's what liberation is. Do you understand that? So
Yes.
do you understand that first point? So understanding then what this samsara is in reference to that is we're still on the treadmill. And what keeps us on the treadmill of being reborn, 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 sometimes good life, sometimes bad life, is the delusions. And in particular, the root delusion, right? So at the moment, we are in a realm that's relatively a good one. There's some happiness, there's access to some virtue. Do you understand my point? As opposed to being a dog where you don't have
Yes.
much choice, you know? Do you understand?
Yes.
So you could ask, from the big picture point of view, you could say that the suffering of suffering, from the big picture point of view of all of samsara, the suffering of suffering is the lower realms. The suffering of change is, like, example would be the human realm, where there is some happiness, but we think it's the best, but it's still in the nature of suffering because we haven't realized emptiness yet. So it's actually looks like happiness, but because it's driven by attachment, it leads to the gross suffering again. Do you understand that point?
Yes.
So when you have attachment, okay, we're in a nice realm, we get nice things and nice food and nice friends and nice this and you know, and then we're attached to it, then we kind of ruin it. We start getting attached to our needs, so then we lie to people, lie and harm and steal, and that sends us right back to the lower realms, to the gross level of suffering.
Okay.
So they're linked to each other. That's the first kind of suffering, is the gross kind. And from the big picture point of view, it's the lower realms.
Okay.
Yesterday and today we've been talking about the three kinds of suffering in relation to just the human realm. So in relation to just the human realm, the suffering of suffering is when the bad things happen. And the suffering of change is when the good things happen. Do you understand that?
Yes, yes.
So in the bigger picture, the suffering of suffering is the lower realms, and the suffering of change is the human realm, which looks like good. And then even we could argue, Buddha's discussing with the Hindus, and he would indeed with the Christians, where the peak, the best samsara is the God realms, where they call that heaven, and they say, now you've achieved the goal. Do you understand? Which is the highest level of bliss and joy. But the Buddha would say, you're still in samsara. Eventually that bliss will run out, and you'll go back to the lower realms again. Whereas the Christians and the Hindus would say that's the end result. So the third level of suffering is in a subtle state of bliss that lasts a long time, but it's still, the suffering part. Okay, put it this way: to stop the first kind of suffering, you've got to stop harming sentient beings. To stop the second kind of suffering, you've got to give up attachment. To stop the third kind of suffering, which is even being in the highest peak of samsara, to stop that, to be reborn altogether, to get out of samsara, you've got to realize emptiness. So the subtlest suffering is being even born in the first place, even into any realm at all, including the best ones. The second kind of suffering is being born in just the human realm, and the third kind, the worst suffering, is the lower realms.
Okay.
So to stop the gross suffering, the suffering of suffering, you stop harming sentient beings. To stop the second kind of suffering, which we call happiness, give up attachment. To stop the third kind of suffering, which is the subtlest level of existence in the samsara, you have to realize emptiness. Then you quit altogether. Is that a bit clear or not?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. What else, people?
Teddy.
Yes.
Coming, Teddy.
Yeah, Teddy.
Can you again please talk about the distinction between pleasure in our culture and happiness and that deep inner value?
Sure thing, let's do it. Okay, this is very tricky. So it's very interesting. If you look at the Buddhist psychological model, you have got a list of 51 what they call mental factors, what we call states of mind. In reality, there are thousands of states of mind, but this particular text, which describes the psychological model of the mind in Buddhism, is plucking out just 51 of these, which are the crucial ones to understand if you want to learn to meditate and practice Dharma. Okay, so in that packaging, there's one group called the 5 always present mental factors. And these are all the kind of the ones that we would call neutral, the ones that aren't virtuous or aren't non-virtuous, but they're the kind of the mechanics of the mind, and these are fundamental to understand because they help us function as ordinary daily people, right? So one of those, there's a really important one to understand, is called feeling. So not the way we use the word feeling, like an emotion, but there's 3 kinds of feelings only we can ever experience. One is called a pleasant feeling. Another word for that is happiness. One is called an unpleasant feeling, and another word for that is unhappiness or suffering, right? And the third one is called a neutral feeling. Well, let's forget the neutral. So if we track our day, okay, how do you go today, what's your name again? I suddenly said, Teddy. Oh, I had a great day, Robina. What happened? Well, you know, I got up early and my friend was friendly and the traffic was good and the lights were green, the food was tasty, the boss was kind, and everything worked beautifully. So you describe your day in terms of all the nice things that happened that would be the trigger for a pleasant feeling. Would you agree? So if you're really doing it internally, you'd track your day internally, and you know, maybe like, oh well, for a while I had very pleasant feelings, and very, very, very pleasant, and then fairly, and then really unpleasant, 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 neutral, neutral, pleasant, pleasant, very pleasant. We can track it internally, and it's all in terms of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. Now the point that Buddha's making is this. A pleasant feeling is another word for happiness. We can have words like joy, bliss, all variations of happiness. It starts with the mind. The body's included too. We can have experiences that also use the body, there's no doubt. But technically it starts with the mind, a pleasant feeling. A dead body can't have feelings. It's a live body that's imbued with a consciousness running through the nervous system. You understand? So feeling is a state of mind. Now, pleasant feelings, which is called happiness, we can see, and as Lord Buddha points out, everybody wants pleasant feelings. Every sentient being wants happiness, pleasant feelings, and nobody likes unpleasant feelings. It's pretty obvious, right? So, what Buddha's saying is this. Okay, you people, I've got a really good method for you. I've got a method that will end up with you having the most blissful feelings that last forever and never change into unpleasant feelings. So we look into our lives, we know we have pleasant feelings for a while, but we all know no matter how long it lasts, how long we try, how hard we try, it doesn't last. It's just not everybody's experience. We can spend our lives getting the world perfectly organized to make sure we get good feelings. Why? Because we are believing that the external world is the cause of good feelings, right? And all Buddha says is you're nuts. It isn't. That's a lie. That's called attachment, because attachment is a neurotic state of mind, a delusion that believes that pleasant feelings, which are completely valid, a pleasant feeling is caused by getting the cake, getting the body, getting the sound, getting the smell, getting the praise. Would you agree with that? That's what we call the suffering of change, what we call happiness, and he calls the suffering of change. And he calls it the suffering of change very simply because it doesn't last. And why it doesn't last is not because he's being mean or anyone's being mean, it's because the methods we're using are wrong. The methods, and are not being morally wrong, they're mistaken. They're literally the wrong recipe. So we believe totally, because we're in a samsaric body, which is the body of the senses, we believe totally, let's say if you're a fisherman, that killing fish, which, you know, I'll use an example of my friend of mine, her little boy, when he first met fishing when he's like 5, it's like he fell in love with fishing. So what's going on here, and this is what I'm getting to, we can deduce he had a strong imprint to kill. One of the ways of killing habits ripening in the present life is the habit to keep doing it. So we can deduce he'd been in the lower realms in the past as a result of killing. That ran out. He got a human birth, you know, amazing, but he had a tendency to kill, which is like one of the residual results of past killing. So because he had the habit to kill, which is the karmic instinct, the millisecond he saw fishing, a whole bunch of things happened. So first of all, the karmic imprint ripened. Simultaneously, it triggers attachment in his mind, this neurotic delusion that's a vampire and craving to only get pleasant feelings. Simultaneously, that attachment makes the fishing look delicious. It also simultaneously, now hear the words exactly, triggers a very pleasant feeling in his body and mind. So it all happens so instantaneously that of course he deduces, well, fishing is the cause of happiness. Look, I've got such good feelings. Now look at sex, look at eating, look at everything we do. It happens so instantaneously, does it not, that we can easily see the mistake we make in believing, of course the cake makes me happy. Look at the good feelings you feel. Buddha's not arguing with that. Eating the cake does trigger a very pleasant feeling. Are you with me so far, people? So what he's saying is, it's deep habit from countless lives There's no delay between putting the cake in the mouth and pleasant feelings coming. It's simultaneous, right? So we logically deduce that cakes are the, are the cause of good feelings, which is why, do you understand? And this is what Buddha says, you're completely mistaken in your analysis. But it's really hard to see. So this is where it gets depressing. What he is saying is what's happening is this. By definition, every millisecond of every good feeling any sentient being ever experiences, from the mildest to the most intense bliss, is the result of a past virtuous action. So that means every time you have a good feeling, it doesn't matter what the condition is out there, forget that. Whether it's killing a fish, eating a cake, raping a child, I don't care. Or stroking someone, or hearing nice praise. Whatever the they're the secondary cause. Do you understand? The killing of the fish, whatever it might be, they're the secondary cause for the Buddha. But the tragedy is, because you've got a tendency to kill, and it triggers attachment, and attachment then makes it look delicious and then triggers good feelings. We see it as one unified experience, and so deduce logically fishing is the cause of happiness. Cake is the cause of happiness. Rape is the cause of happiness. Sex is the cause of happiness. Food is the cause of happiness. He says no. Every millisecond of happy feelings we have, in reality, is the ripening of the seed from a past virtuous action. So, in other words, it is the fruit of virtue. Literally, happiness is the fruit of virtue. Literally, happiness is the fruit of virtue. And each millisecond of every moment of happiness is each millisecond of seed ripening. So, in other words, I have to swear again, by thinking that fishing causes it, that cake causes it, that sex causes it, that samsara causes it, that attachment causes it, is completely pissing our virtue down the toilet. It's completely outrageous. It's like totally contaminating. We're completely using up all our virtuous karma from the past by thinking that killing makes me happy, and sex makes me happy, and cake makes me happy. In fact, it causes you to increase attachment and then send yourself straight back to the lower realms. So it's a highly technical explanation that we have to really think through logically. So feeling, a pleasant feeling, how fantastic. But it's not the fruit of getting a sense object. It's the fruit of virtue. But the tragedy is it's triggered when you kill, when you steal, when you eat, when you have sex. And that's the logic of samsara. So what Buddha's saying, hey guys, I've got a method for you. For you to have good feelings, such level of bliss that are completely natural to you, that have got nothing to do with sense objects. Nothing to do with rubbish. In fact, the good feelings you can have are what you'll get when, guess what? You give up attachment. So for us, happiness, good feelings, is what we get when attachment gets what it wants. That's our logic, isn't it? We think happiness is the fruit of getting attachment's needs. That's the tragedy. He says, no, you got it wrong. Happiness, good feelings, and far better blissful ones that will not change into suffering are the result of when you give up attachment. Are you hearing me? So we've got to learn the techniques. It's technical, highly technical. It's not emotional, it's not religious, it's not kind of moralistic, it's technical. Are we communicating, people? So that's why it's so hard to give up attachment. We should be so kind to ourselves. We are junkies, basically. Attachment equals junkie. Attachment is junkie. Our trouble is in our culture, junkie is normal. And only when you're a serious junkie are you mentally ill. Buddha says, no, baby, we're all junkies. It's just a question of degree. That's why it's so hard to even give up pathetic eating too much. I mean, forget, you're not a pedophile, you don't murder, you don't go fishing, you just eat too much. Look at how hard it is to change that pathetic little habit. The distress, the torment. You understand? Because it's an attachment. And how hard it is to see that cake, that eating of cake is not the main cause of pleasant feelings. It looks like it, utterly, and this is the tragedy, we can't see it. And it's so tragic that because you've got the habit to kill, the habit to do all these demented things, that it simultaneously triggers. I mean, it's highly complex how it all works, you know. It triggers those seeds you planted in the past of virtue. Now the point is this, let's say the fisherman gets migraines every day. It's the proof that fishing isn't the cause of happiness, because he would not get pleasant feelings while he went fishing while he had migraines, would he? Because he'd be overwhelmed by his suffering. Because migraine is the fruit of a negative action. Every millisecond of unpleasant feelings, by definition, is the fruit of a negative action. This is the fundamental of Buddha's law of karma, the fundamental starting point. Virtue causes happiness, non-virtue causes suffering. But you've got to really unpack it to understand the logic of it, you know? Which is why we're so caught up in this realm of desire. Are we communicating? Okay. Huh? Yes.
Is the attachment that you just described that drives us to seek happiness in influences from the out, in things in the outside world, is it different from the yearning that drives us to learn?
I understand,
and to seek and to seek from and to seek the truth.
Absolutely.
And how is it different?
I understand exactly. Exactly. This is what's so fascinating about Buddha's model of the mind. He's very distinct and precise in this precise in the distinction between what is labeled a negative action and a positive one. It's not, you see, we hear it moralistically. It's got zero to do with being moralistic. It's a technical, a fine technical point. That a state of mind that is labeled a negative one, or labeled a negative one in general, necessarily is coming from the root, the outcropping of ego grasping. It's a product of ego grasping, the panic-stricken sense of I. It's not an accurate assessment of reality. It's a lie, and it's deeply disturbing. They're its characteristics. It's delusional and disturbing. Literally, that's its characteristics. So then, by definition, a virtuous state of mind is not delusional, relatively speaking, and is not disturbing. Now, our problem, and they're precise points. So our problem is all of our delusions and all of our virtues are mixed up in a big soup, and we can't tell one bit from another. That's the trouble. So right now we could say, us in this room, as opposed to being in the, we might be in the gun club, or we might be out there killing or raping, but we're not. We're in this room because we can deduce logically. We've got the Buddhist view. We've got karmic imprints from past practice of something spiritual. That's why we were driven to come today, to listen to some methods to how to become a better person. This is what spiritual is about. So first of all, how amazing. Now that's in the virtue category. We've got an imprint of that, of virtue from the past. But because we're still in samsara and we haven't realized emptiness and we've still got masses of delusions, that means join the club, we've also got attachment. So until we're really, really advanced and have realized emptiness virtually, we've got to have attachment all the way. So all of our virtues and all of our delusions are kind of working hand in hand. So at any given moment, let's say in a relationship, one day, the virtues might win. And you're going to be patient and kind and loving, but it's a real struggle, isn't it? Because you've got to struggle against attachment, not getting what it wants, against the pain, against the aversion, against the annoyance. You're really struggling, but that's, virtue won. Another day, non-virtue might win and the delusions get rampant. So we can see it's a constant struggle, and that's what the struggle is between following the neuroses and following the virtues, right? So, until we're really advanced, our compassion, our love, our aspirations, our marvelous yearnings, which you can say are virtuous, are polluted by attachment. Naturally, it's okay, join the club. We can't not have a pure yearning that isn't polluted by attachment. We're always going to have a bit of both. So when you love somebody, love is under the heading virtue. It says, may you be happy. It delights in their happiness. You want them to be happy. It's interconnected. It's altruistic. There's compassion there. You empathize with their suffering. So you can say, the less attachment and neediness and neurosis you have, the more compassion, the more love, the more empathy. But the more attachment, the more neurosis, the more self-centeredness, the less compassion, the less love. So it's this constant kind of back and forth that we have to, and that's what practice is, struggling with these. And the other crucial one, being your own therapist, understanding Buddha's model of the mind, learning it very clearly, the job of actually distinguishing every millisecond between one or the other is extremely subtle. Because it's really hard to tell. And so let's say a person's kind of like, okay, a person like me who is volatile, and since a little girl, angry very easily. It was really easy to see that anger was there. You understand? It It was really easy. But another one of my sisters, who is like a good girl, I'm not being horrible here, she still had aversion, but she had always, it wasn't so volatile. So she had compassion too. I had compassion too, but my anger was very practiced. Hers was less so. We both have attachment. So my attachment was more to what I wanted, so I'd get angry. Her, my other sister I can think of, her attachment was more to make everything nice, because attachment is a multifaceted thing. It's fundamental energy. Attachment is a junkie only for the nice things. And so in a good girl who has got compassion but lots of attachment, the attachment isn't always to get what they want. That's how mine was. Their attachment is to make everything nice, because that attachment can't stand anything going wrong. Do you understand? So the good person, or their compassion to make everything nice, is completely mixed with attachment to get what she wants in that sense, which is to be everything to be peaceful. But it's much harder to recognize that attachment. You know, this particular sister and I would joke, because my father was an alcoholic and there's dramas, 7 children, not even enough beds, we were fighting, yelling, dramas, you know, always constant dramas. So she found a letter when she was about 13 or 14, she wrote to herself about, well, Daddy comes home drunk at 9 o'clock and Mummy's in the other room and Robina's over there, and I'll get Daddy into his room so Mummy doesn't see him, so they don't fight, so Robina won't get into the trouble. Sort of like trying to manipulate it all. That's her attachment, which is control, making it all nice, because she can't her attachment can't stand when it's unpeaceful. Her compassion's genuine, but the attachment polluted the compassion, so she'd look like she was being really kind. And so that's called worry. That's called worry and anxiety, which is driven by attachment, because attachment can't stand anything that I doesn't want. So it's really tricky to see attachment when you don't necessarily have a volatile personality, because attachment is driven by, pollutes any of our good stuff. So the more we become familiar with our mind, the more we're going to notice that pollution and recognize and hear it clearly, and then learn not to follow it, and to follow the virtue and to grow and nourish the virtuous parts of us. So it's a tricky job, you know. Are we communicating? Okay. Oops. And you know, we say, oh, I shouldn't have attachment, oh, I've got so much attachment, oh, I'm so attached, blah, 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 you know. Excuse me, don't hold your breath. It's going to be a long time, and that's why in the Bodhisattva path we can be skillful, and so at least be attached to something that will help you. If you're going to be attached to a spiritual path, then great, honey, go for it. But the actual problem about attachment is, if it's really mostly attachment, that means, you know, be quiet, I'm trying to meditate, you will say. But then after a month you'll be bored, because attachment doesn't last. So as long as there is virtue there, that will sustain you. But if it's mostly attachment, you'll just give it up after a week. You'll get bored, you know. So attachment, as long as it is there, be skillful. At least be attached to a person who won't beat you up every day. At least be attached to a thing that will help you become a better person. And then eventually get rid of all attachment. So you've got to be skillful, and this is the Bodhisattva approach. And this is why, as Lama Zopa says in this book that, you know, that's coming out as a PDF and coming out next year from Wisdom, about how to help people at the time of death. You know, Rinpoche said, you know, the 12 links of dependent arising, this teaching of Buddha's, how things happen every millisecond. We're creating these links of continuous lives every day. But as Lama Zopa says, the 8th and the 9th links, which are craving and grasping, which are very intense, extra intense, strong levels of attachment that occur at the time of death in particular. Intensely strong. Intensely strong. So that's why we have to be so cautious when we're helping people die or dying ourselves. And the point about the grasping, craving comes first and then grasping increases. And because of the time of death, if you've never thought about death, then what are you grasping at? The body, the life, your friends, your beloveds. So it's like beyond terrifying. Because what is there to look forward to for most people is a black hole. Who wants to fall into a black hole? You know? And one of the jobs of attachment in our daily life, you look at it, is looking forward to something. Attachment is multifaceted. It's neediness, it's dissatisfaction, it's expectation, it's manipulation, it's controlling, it embellishes, it possesses, and it constantly looks forward to something. That's the main energy of attachment. You know, now I'll do this, and now I'll get up, and now I'll go have lunch, and I'll go to bed, and I'll get up, and I'll do here, I'll go to work, I'll do this, and when I'm 20, I'll do that, and when I'm 40, I'll do this. This is what attachment does, running forward, looking forward to something all the time. And look at what depression is. Attachment has collapsed, and there's nothing to look forward to. The attachment burst, you know, gone. So at the time of death, what have most people got to look forward to? But the black hole is beyond terrifying. So skillful, Rinpoche said. Be skillful. Look forward to a nice human rebirth. If you're a Christian, look forward to heaven. It's really skillful means. At least you can relax and die peacefully, all excited with attachment to heaven. It'll help you get there, because everything's made by the mind. Heaven's just a name for a virtuous, blissful experience. So until we're hardly realised, you've got to have grasping. So Rinpoche says we need that grasping at a human birth. It's skillful means, using attachment. Are we communicating? We've got to recognise it first and know its function. It reminds me of actually Nancy Reagan, because she was completely depressed when Ronnie died, you know, because she was totally attached to Ronnie. And she asked, what was his name? That famous minister. Graham. What's his name? Billy Graham. She said, please, Billy, you know, Father Graham, Reverend Graham or whatever. She said, I need to know, will I see Ronnie in heaven? And he said, yes, you will. So she relaxed. She's looking forward to Ronnie. I mean, they'll meet for sure, karmic connection somehow, you know, who knows what, maybe there'll be a baby, but she won't recognise him, you know. What? I know that, yeah. So, anyway, we understand about attachment. It's kind of really a tricky, and it's so much more nuanced than we think. That's why we've got to have internal. That's why Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for 1 whole year. We will never begin to understand it until we start looking deeply inside. And this is when we really start to practice, you know. Any more questions? For lunch?
Yeah, I have
Where
a
are
question.
you?
Yes.
Yes, darling.
You've mentioned emptiness a couple of times. Is
Yeah.
it possible at all to touch on that just a little bit? I mean, I
We
know
did it
it's-
yesterday. Were you here yesterday, Dan?
Yes, I was here yesterday.
You were.
Well, I was here in the morning.
All right, darling, we did it in the afternoon. It's dinner time. Are the people, okay, are the people all they're preparing lunch, aren't they? Yeah. We'll do 5 minutes. Okay? Okay. As I've been saying, Buddha's model of the mind says we've got these neuroses, these delusions. And hear the word literally, please. All these states of mind are liars. They're based on being misconceptions that trigger very painful feelings. So they're disturbing and they're delusional. So there's a hierarchy of them, which I like to put it that way. Attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, all these ones we know so well are like the branch delusions. They're the day-to-day ones. But they're rooted in, underpinned by the root delusion that's so subtle that even its assumption, this ignorance, this maripa, is the assumption of a definite, pointable I that's independent. First of all, the grossest understanding of causes and conditions, then more subtly independent of the bits and pieces that make you up, the parts, and the subtlest one, the most primordial, the one that Lama Zopa ever only talks about, is the one that's independent of the mind calling it that. So basically, the Buddha's saying everything in the universe is a product of the mind. He means that literally. So you say, you know, I'm going to prison. So straight away we'll go, either you'll go, oh God, what did you do? Or you'll go, oh, I'm so sorry, Robina, or whatever, you know. Because why? Because you know the meaning of the word I. Why? Because you've learned it. It's just a sound coming out the mouth. I. If you don't speak English, you don't have a clue what a person's saying. So you learn the meaning. This is already proving emptiness. Proving it. If, Buddha's saying this, if even the word I were inherently existing, which is what we instinctively think, but we didn't know we thought that, which means it exists in and of itself, from its own side, in and of itself, I is a real thing. That if it were like that, the moment anybody heard the word I, they'd know immediately what it meant. Because merely labeled, this subtlest meaning of emptiness, is that the meaning of something is in the something. So if there were actual meaning in the word I, as soon as you heard the word I, you'd know what it meant. But we know that's not true. Every single thing we have ever learned in this life, somebody had to tell us what it meant. You learn, I mean, language is really obvious. You haven't got a clue of anything. You don't know botany until you learn it. You see a strange thing out there with a poke and a this and a green, a red. You've got no idea what it is. But if it were an inherent rose, which is what we think is there, although we don't think that is like that. But this is how it would be if it were how we think, which means there's a rose out there that is in itself a rose. That in itself it's got its own characteristic of roseness. If that were true, you would see it and it would go, and it would be evident to you. It would go, hello, I'm a rose. We know it's not like that. You have to learn, oh, that is called a rose. What's a rose? Then you learn seeds and things. You have to learn all this system to understand the word a rose. Then you get used to it. And then as soon as you hear it, you recognize a rose. Well, that's what we're doing for eons, Buddha says, learning trillions upon trillions of things that we first hear, then we pick it up, then we learn it, and then we forget that we made it up. As one Lama said, we're like children who draw a lion and then become afraid of it. The universe, Buddha says, is like this. Everything that exists, from a Buddha to a hell being, a word called prison, a prison itself, a flower, pee-pee, caca, you name it. It's the construct over eons of time of minds. So Buddha says, ultimately, finally, every single phenomenon that does exist, and that means dependent arising, you first have to establish a dependent arising, a conventional truth. There is a cup. What is a cup? It's a container. What does it do? It holds your tea. Then you prove it holds the tea by pouring it in, and then you make sure there's no other valid cognition that contradicts that. So you tick all the boxes, you sign the contract, you make agreement, you shake hands. Now we all agree that is a cup. But who made it that? Our mind. Everything can be established like that in the universe. So Buddha's saying that we think and have since beginningless time, and the part of us that thinks it is this ego grasping, this root delusion that underpins all the others. It believes it has since beginningless time, totally, utterly, completely, 1,000,000,000%, that everything that exists doesn't exist like that. It's like we forget that we created it. We forget that we made it. We forget that we bought into believing in it. And we think it's out there from its own side. And this is the nightmare, as he says, of this dualistic view, of this schizophrenic, bereft, lonely, unhappy, broken-hearted, fractured sense of panic-stricken fear, me, empty and nothing, desperately hungry like vampires for all that stuff out there that we forget that we created, to stuff it all in, to fill me up, to make me content. This is the nightmare of believing in this separate, bereft, broken-hearted little me. So we're like the children who draw the line and then we become afraid of it. We draw the flower, then we become attached to it. We make the cake and then we think it's going to make us happy. We created it in the first place. It's come from our mind. So even right now, every time, they say that, a cup is made by the mind. So don't get confused and think that means your mind literally conjured a cup like out of nowhere. That's superstition. No, there has to be a basis there. There has to be, as Lama says, the basis there. The basis is certainly what we can call cup. But the point of cup is a construct. Cup is a conceptual story that our mind has created that imputes it upon the base. But that indeed does function. It does function as a cup. So that's the tricky part. It's like smoke and mirrors. Ultimately, they say there's not one atom of anything that you can find on the base that makes it a cup, that gives it the meaning of cup. The meaning cup is imputed by mind. But not just on anything. That means anything goes. So some of the earlier Buddhist schools would say, no, you can't say that. That's nihilism. Because that means you can call anything anything. No, the Prasangikas say. It has to function. And that's the part that keeps it tense and correct. As long as it functions as a cup, you can still say there's no cup from its own side. And it's putting these two together, the conventional and the ultimate, that's the trickiest part. As Lama Zopa says, when you've realized that from the side of the cup, from the side of the basis, there's not one atom of anything there that makes it that. There can't be, because if it were there, it would mean it is independent of the thought thinking it. That means you'd know it's a cup as soon as you see it. That means you don't need to bother with the thought cup and the definition, because it's already a cup and you'd know it already. Why bother calling it a cup? If it says, hello, I'm a cup, Robina, then you're done with it. It is inherent. And that's the point about prison. One of my friends, many of my friends are happy in prison. Now, conventionally, the definition of prison, oh dear, more than 5 minutes. Okay, we'll leave that till after lunch. Okay, can we just check the lunch people are okay? Jennifer, are we all okay? You're not having a mental breakdown out there? Okay, 3 more minutes. Okay. Okay, so listen, one of my friends, okay, this wonderful story about this lady in Miami. I love this story, maybe somewhere in Florida, sorry. Years ago I read about this woman, I read her memoir. It blows my mind. This is proving emptiness. She was, hitching with her hubby and the 3 kids, and they got picked up by 2 blokes, and the 2 blokes got picked up by the coppers, and then the 2 blokes killed the coppers and blamed the people. So they're on death row. 17 years she's on death row. The husband even gets executed. Can you imagine the nightmare? I mean, we're just accused of saying the wrong word and we have a mental breakdown. You're accused of being a cop killer. You lose your kids, your husband is executed. This woman going through this nightmare. And finally, as she said, finally, I realized I could not change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I am not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. That means that woman had an ability, literally, to redefine her reality. Because the reality is this. It is a prison. It was a prison. It fits all the definition of a prison. A prison is an ugly house where you're sent and you don't have any freedom. That's the definition of prison, let's say. It fits the definition. Check the box. It fits that. It's ugly. You have no freedom. You're seen as like an animal because you kill coppers. You've got no freedom. Food's disgusting. People are maniacs. All of this is what a prison is conventionally. It fits the definition. It functions as that way. But ultimately, there's nothing from the side of that house, that place, that being there, that wasn't made by the mind. Meaning, she stopped buying into the inherent view, the view of an inherent prison. It is evil, it's bad, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. Like most people, and they go mad. But she had the ability. She wasn't a Buddhist, she was a Hindu or something, or did yoga, But had this imprint, this ability, simply to see it from a different point of view. That's what emptiness is. You have the ability to interpret it differently. So she decided, I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. So what happened? She became happy. This proves emptiness. And the point is this. If prison were inherently negative, if it were inherently an ugly house, meaning from its own side, meaning not dependent on anything else, in itself, frozen in space, ugly, she could never, ever, 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 ever change her view of it because it would be set in stone. And the Buddha says nothing exists like that. It's completely empty of an inherent existence, but nevertheless it does function. That keeps it grounded. That's the Prasangika view. That's what Tsongkhapa says. Brilliant. So there is an enlightened being who does function as an enlightened being, who pervades the universe with trillions of bodies, helps trillions of sentient beings. Fact, let's say. But not one atom of that enlightened being is inherent. Can't be. And in fact, When we realize emptiness, we realize that things exist because they are empty. Not in spite of it, because of it. Because nothing that isn't empty can exist. It's frozen in space. It's paralyzed. Okay, so think of lunch as empty. Just a second, 1 second. Think of lunch as out there. We go out there, we see the lunch. It's the shapes and sizes and this and that and green things and round things and square things and fat things and greasy things and soft things. And we call it peas and carrots and bread and butter. We've got all this delicious, all this. I'm a little bit all excited, you know, because we've got this head full of these definitions, driven by these definitions that we believe are real in the food out there itself on the plate. Not possible. It's made by our mind. There is a basis, but we put all the rest into it, the meaning. So think, it's got no meaning from its own side. It has meaning insofar as I give it that meaning. So give it the best meaning possible. Blissful, joyful, delicious, divine, blessed by the energy of all the holy beings. Om Ahung, Om Ahung, Om Ahung. And the nature of bliss. And then we think of the gurus and the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Dakas and the Dakinis and Dhamma protectors and gods and humans and animals and predators and hell beings and Bado beings and form beings and formless beings. All the holy, all the ordinary, pervading space. And then we turn them all into Tara. Trillions of Guru Taras. And then we see them all experiencing the bliss of receiving this blissful, empty, transcendental nectar that we so happily offer. And then, as Lama Zopa said one time, once you've done that, the bigger your stomach, the better.